Hey guys, Matt with CJ Off-Road here. Today we're in front of our 2015 JK two-door Rubicon, and it's time to do some brakes and pads. Now this isn't really the hottest or the most cool part to do, but it's really vital when you start putting on some larger wheels and tires and lifting the thing. You want it to be able to stop just as well as it can articulate on the trail. And that's why we reached out to our friends over at Hawk, and they sent us over a set of their Talon Rotors and their Street 5.0 pads. Now the guys over at Hawk are really great at making brakes, and they've been doing it for a very long time. They actually make them for the military and create them for pretty much any vehicle out on the road. What I really like about these Talon Rotors is that they are vented and slotted, and they come in this black coating, which I think looks really clean on there. Plus they're designed to OE spec and they're balanced. So you're gonna reduce that rotational mass with these on here, and you're also gonna get much more stopping power. Now the reason we went with the Street Performance 5.0 pads is that they do have an extended life, and they're gonna reduce friction in hot and cold scenarios. When you're driving a Jeep, you have this thing in the middle of winter as well as the middle of summer, and the heat differences and the cold differences can really change the performance of your brakes. With the Street 5.0, you're not gonna have to worry about that, and it's gonna increase the life of your rotors and pads. Now we're gonna get them installed on this 2015 JK. This will be a good video if you've never done brakes, to kind of show you how to do it and some of the basics on when to do them and why you need to replace your rotors and pads with some Hawk performance. So obviously the first step is to remove the wheel and tire. You can see that we've got that done here, and we've turned it that way to make it a little bit easier for you guys to see. The next step after you have the wheel and tire removed is to remove this caliper off of the back. Now this takes a 12mm socket to get this pulled off, and I would recommend if you're doing brake lines or anything like that onto your Jeep, definitely replace the pads and rotors at the same time as you're already there in the first place. But the first thing we're gonna do is get this caliper off. We can get those pads out, and then we can get the rotor off as well. Grab yourself your 13mm socket, break those bolts free. It looks like our backside is spinning a little bit on that top one. This one's coming out nice and easy for us. They're just small little bolts there, so not too long. Now we can pull the caliper off, and we're gonna set that right on top of the upper ball joint. You don't wanna let this just hang because it will put tension on the brake line, and it could potentially tear. It's not likely, but it's not good to put tension on these brake lines. Now we're gonna pull off the pads. That's one way to do it. We'll pop those off as well. And now we can use a 21mm socket to get our caliper bracket off. That way we can remove the rotor. These can be a little bit tight, and they do use a larger socket, so it definitely helps to have a nice 1/2" ratchet on there. On the top here, we can pop out this ABS line, or just push it up a little bit so we can get the socket on. In our case today, we only had to break them free, and then you can loosen them up by hand. Now we can pull off the caliper bracket. And we can pull off our old rotor. With the old rotor removed, we can grab our brand new Hawk Talon rotor and slide it into place. Try not to get your greasy hands all over this section because it will create wear, and it's not gonna be good for the pads once they start going around there. So now with the new rotor installed, we can slide over our caliper bracket. And then once you have your caliper bracket on, go ahead and grab your caliper bracket bolts, put a little Loctite on the end of them. We can get those started. Once you have the caliper bracket bolts installed, we're going to torque them down to 120 foot-pounds. The same up top. So now we're going to install the Street Performance 5.0 pads. Now you'll know the inside pad because it's going to have this little standoff here. You're going to obviously put it in the direction that the rotor is going. You can see it's got a curve, and we'll slide it in just like so. Now we can go onto the front. It's gonna be the exact same thing, except it doesn't have that standoff here. There's just 2 pins up top and 2 at the bottom. Sometimes you have to give it a little tap like that, just to set it into place the right way. Now is a good time also to grease the slides here. Now the slides will be under this rubber boot and they'll simply pull out. You can add a little extra grease onto those and then put them right back in, making sure that the end of the boot goes over the cap. So you can see we've put some fresh grease on there. Just gonna go ahead and rub it in a little bit. You wanna make sure that these freely slide. So that's a very important part of the brake system. This will eliminate a lot of the squeaks and issues you have. And we can squeeze that in there, making sure that boot goes over the end. And that one's good. We'll do the same down here in the lower one. You can see we've got a good amount of grease in this lower one here. That'll collect into the boot and make a much more, quiet ride and no more squeaking up on the brakes. So if you're having issues, it's a good place to start. See all that grease just kind of pops out like that, and it'll go right inside the boot and be good to go. Now we're gonna take our caliper, slide it back into place. It might be necessary to actually clamp this in and depress it. So here's a little tip. If your piston actually pushes out like this, like ours did, you're gonna have to grab an old pad, the one that you just pulled off, and a C-clamp. And this is a trick to get this back in and protect the piston at the same time. You don't wanna put the end of the C-clamp inside there and push it on because you can actually damage the piston and the seals. So we're gonna go ahead and try and do this right over here. Loosen it up a little bit more. Go on the back side of the caliper. You can see we're not binding up on anything. We're on the back side there. And then we've got the top end here. And we're just gonna twist this and compress that. Once you have it fully compressed, back that off. Set your clamp and your pad down. And there you go. It'll slide right over instead of binding up there on us. Once that's on, go ahead and grab your caliper bolts. Once again, apply some red Loctite to the tip of those. We're just gonna get them started up top here. And we'll do the same down below. And these bolts on the back, they use a 13mm socket, and we're gonna torque these down to 26 foot-pounds. So we've got our torque wrench set to 26 foot-pounds. Go ahead and get on the back side there. Get good torque there. Let's get it done up top. And there we go. This brake is now complete. We've got a fresh rotor on there, fresh pads. The last step is obviously put your wheels and tires back on and get that torque down. But for now, we're gonna move on to the rear, and then once we're done with the rear, repeat the exact same process on the other side. So on the rear, it'll pretty much be the identical same process. Besides, the caliper is obviously smaller and the pads are smaller as well. First thing we're gonna pull off is those same 13mm bolts that hold on the sliders. Get the top one pulled off. Get that lower one removed as well. Set those aside. We will be reinstalling them just like on the front. We can slide the caliper off. These rear brakes on this Jeep are definitely in need of a change. You can see they're flaking and falling off. But if you're gonna do just one side, you might as well do them all. Set that caliper up top, and let's look at those guys. Completely rusted. The back end of this rotor is just shot. These pads are gone. I'll show you once I pull them off. I'm just gonna use a little mini pry bar here to kind of get these off. Be careful when you do this, but we're replacing everything, so it's not really a huge deal. So we got that side popped off. Oh boy. Wow. Yeah, these were shot. You can see it's cracking there too. Definitely want to make sure your brakes are good, because if you're driving around on this thing, it's not going to be good when you go to slam on these and need them in emergency. So you can see we've barely got any life left in these. The back half, look, well, there, just fell off. So to the trash they go. And we'll get the back side off as well and see how bad those puppies look. Look, there's a piece of the rotor falling off. Yeah, same story. Pretty bad. Good time to replace them. It's a little bit different than the front. This caliper bracket is held on by an 18mm socket. We're actually going to use a shallow one because with the sway bar link there, it is a little tighter. So we're going to reach underneath here. Make sure we run the bolt all the way. And break them free. These are a little bit tighter, so after you break them free, in our case, we at least had to keep the socket on here a little bit. So there you go, pull that bolt out, set that aside, then we'll get the top one done. So we can set the caliper bracket aside, start grabbing our new pieces. So before we can pull the rotor off, there are these little retention clips that hold the rotor on. I like to use a small pick and kind of just bend at them to get them pulled off. You don't need to put these back on when you reinstall the new rotors. They are just from factory. So just go underneath them, and they're like little fins in there. And if you get underneath one of them, kind of pull as hard as you can, it'll actually kind of rip them apart a little bit. Let's see what we can do with this one. There they go, pull right off. Okay, now that we have all those off, we're going to give the rotor a little hit with a hammer on the back and pop that off. So we're actually going to pull the rotor off now. Truth be told, we struggled with this for about 15 minutes. Now what's happening is the emergency brake pad on the inside here, there's marks up top, it was actually stuck on. So we're going to go through and adjust our emergency brake. If you have any issues pulling the rotor off, that's a good sign that the emergency brake needs adjusted. So we're going to do that off camera, and then once we get that all done, we'll show you how to put on your new pads and rotors. Now we're going to grab our new Hawk Talon rotor, slide it into place. Now that we have the brakes successfully adjusted, you can see that's much cleaner than the completely rusted out rotor that we had on before. Next thing we want to do is reinstall our caliper bracket. So you can see we'll slide the caliper bracket on and then reinstall those 18mm bolts with some red Loctite on there too. These get torqued down. I'll have to check. Definitely always double check the torque specs on your brakes. They're a vital part of your vehicle. You know, wheels and tires, that's everything that's moving and keeping you safe, so definitely check the torque specs, but I'm going to check it here in a second. We'll get those tightened down. You're going to torque the rear caliper bolts to 55 foot-pounds. So we've got the pads installed. This is the same process as the front. Make sure that it goes in the same rotation as the rotor, then we can put our caliper back on. So now once we have that compressed, we're going to slide it over. Put a little red Loctite onto these bolts as well, get them started. And these will also get torqued down to 26 foot-pounds. All right guys, that's it. We're gonna repeat the exact same process for the front and on the rear, and that'll complete your installation. So after you're done putting on the front and rear brakes on your vehicle, now you want to make sure that you get these things properly bedded in. Now Hawk recommends that you take 6 to 10 times to go from 30 to 35 miles an hour to a moderate stopped position. They basically want you to speed up to 30 to 35, slow down moderately to a complete stop, and continue to do this. Then they want you to do it 3 times at a 40 to 45 mile an hour. This will help the rotor and the pad bed into each other and create a film on the two that really marks them in and helps you stop a whole lot better. Make sure not to drag the brakes, and after you're done doing this first process, let them cool down for 15 minutes before you drive this thing normally, and you'll be good to go. There's nothing else you need to do. Now also, while this thing is still up on the lift, make sure you pump the brakes and have pressure to each caliper, making sure that your brakes are going to stop really nice. Now I hope you guys like these Hawk brakes. I personally think they look great, but the main purpose of these is that it's going to stop a whole lot better. If you're looking for brakes, definitely check these out on cjponyparts.com. Hope you enjoyed that video. To stay up to date on our CJ Off-Road videos, make sure to subscribe up top here, and for any other installs, make sure to click the link right above.